Hello, everyone. John Stuart Mill's famous defense of free speech is contained in his 1859 work on liberty. His defense is not just against government censorship by written law, but also against collective opinion. He seeks to determine the right limit to collective opinion, legitimately interfering with individuals. He says when society creates mandates in matters where it ought not to meddle, it practices a social tyranny more formidable than many kinds of political oppression, since, though not usually upheld by such extreme penalties, it leaves fewer means of escape, penetrating much more deeply into the details of life and enslaving the soul itself. Protection, therefore, against the tyranny of the magistrate is not enough. There needs protection also against the tyranny of the prevailing opinion and feeling, against the tendency of society to impose, by other means than civil penalties, its own ideas and practices as rules of conduct on those who dissent from them. It is clear from this that the freedom of speech that Mill seeks to defend is the freedom to speak against government, against society and its opinions, without so-called consequences. Yet Mill did anticipate that certain questions may be raised about free speech. What about extreme cases? Is there no limit to free speech? What about disrespectful or offensive behavior? I will briefly give his three replies and then proceed to his main positive argument. As for to how much of an extreme he thinks free speech should be allowed, he answers thus. Strange it is that men should admit the validity of the arguments for free discussion, but object to their being pushed to an extreme, not seeing that unless the reasons are good for an extreme case, they are not good for any case. Now this needs some unpacking. At this point, he is implying that if you don't advocate freedom of so-called extreme speech, you really do not advocate free speech. But there's more. He goes on to say of such persons, strange that they should imagine that they are not assuming infallibility when they acknowledge that there should be free discussion on all subjects that can possibly be doubtful, but think that some particular principle or doctrine should be forbidden to be questioned because it is so certain. That is, because they are certain that it is certain. That 2 plus 3 equals 5 is one belief, and that we are certain that 2 plus 3 equals 5 is a second belief. When you question a sacred doctrine, they apply the second level of belief, that they are certain of its certainty. Mill goes on in the next paragraph to explain by what criteria a particular principle or doctrine is chosen to be subject to a claim of infallibility. Sometimes a belief is regarded as important to a society or conducive to our well-being, and therefore worthy of protection from a public attack. Mill advises us not to be fooled by the shift from the truth of a proposition to a second level of the truth of its usefulness. He exposes their sleight of hand where he says, this mode of thinking makes the justification for restraints on discussion not a question of the truth of the doctrines, but of their usefulness, and flatters itself by that means to escape the responsibility of claiming to be an infallible judge of opinions. But those who thus satisfy themselves do not perceive that the assumption of infallibility is merely shifted from one point to another. The usefulness of opinion is itself matter of opinion, as disputable, as open to discussion, and requiring discussion as much as the opinion itself. There is the same need of an infallible judge of opinions to decide an opinion to be noxious as to decide it to be false, unless the opinion has full opportunity of defending itself. Mill does accept one limit, however, regarding the inciting of violence. He gives an example of someone believing that corn dealers starve the poor, or that private property constitutes robbery. Mill believes this person should be allowed unmolested free speech in expressing that opinion in the press. However, the same speech delivered or handed out on a placard to an excited mob assembled before the house of a corn dealer may justly incur punishment. I'm not exactly sure why Mill chooses the place of the speech rather than whether the content actually promotes violence as his criteria. Is it because it is the home of the corn dealer, and not his place of business? He doesn't say. Either way, what is interesting here is that even though he admits of this limit, Mill explicitly decides not to blame the speaker for any violence of people who agree with him, unless he is there goading them into it. As for someone's concern about disrespectful conduct, the advocates of censorship are blaming the wrong group, and should be worrying about themselves instead. It is the people proposing new or unpopular ideas, who are few and uninfluential, who need to resort to facts and reason to gain a captive audience and be convincing, while the establishment defenders have the luxury of demonizing them. He says, the worst offense of this kind which can be committed by a polemic is to stigmatize those who hold a contrary opinion as bad and immoral men. This weapon is denied to those who attack a prevailing opinion. What Mill is saying here is that if fear of bad behavior can justify censorship, it is the conformists defending establishment opinion that we would need to silence or control. As to their methods, I have made a video on the fallacies of abuse that you can check out. So to sum up, the answers to the critical questions. Complaints about pushing free speech to an extreme are actually claims of infallibility. Irrational limit exists when speech actively incites violence. And disrespectful conduct is a luxury of the conformist. For his main argument, Mill sees three possible truth values of the censored opinion. It can be true, false, or partly true and false. He puts forth three corresponding objections to censorship. The first is that the censored opinion may be true. Not allowing free speech assumes our infallibility, and thus there exists no right to decide the matter for all mankind, denying others their means of judging, as well as the benefit of truth. In Mill's view, none of us are infallible, and given that, the only path to certainty for us is free and open debate. The second argument is that if the censored opinion is false, censoring it disallows a greater understanding, through fearless discussion, of the received true opinion, which then will be held as a dead dogma, not a living truth. Mill suggests that the Christianity of his time and place is becoming such a dead dogma. The other possibility is that the censored opinion is partly true, and should share the stage with its opposite theory. He has in mind here that opinions favorable to both aristocracy and democracy, property and equality, liberty and discipline, and other antagonisms be discussed with equal freedom, talent, and energy, that both obtain their fair due. If we want to be certain of our opinions and believe them in a lively way, it is by means of lively debate that allows for whatever merits of the contrary opinion to be heard. Then, even if it turns out that we were right all along, we are now more cognizant of the grounds of our true opinion. I would say that Mill's arguments on the whole are very strong on their own, although I will agree he is vague on the point of a limit. As for myself, I feel no need for censorship. I base my opinions on evidence and have, on a few occasions, been convinced to change my opinion, but only by honest people who treat me with respect and make good arguments. If you liked it, check out my longer version about Mill's On Liberty that also goes into freedoms of character and action and group freedom, and where I am more critical of him. Thanks for watching.